Hi students, I'm Dr. Hevert, and I'm going to be walking you through Richard Hakluyt's Discourse of Western Planting. It's a really interesting source, but I realize that it's a source that might be a little bit intimidating, especially if this is one of the first primary sources that you've read. Remember, a primary source is something that is written or painted, drawn, recorded at the time that we're studying. So we are trying to figure out right now, why did the English colonize in North America? And we can look at Richard Hakluyt and what he wrote about it, because he wrote during the time that the English were deciding whether or not they were going to colonize North America. And as will become clear from the source, he had the ear of Queen Elizabeth I, who is the big decision maker here. Now, whenever we go into a primary source, it's important to have some sense of context. And we've kind of already done that. So, for example, we have said we're reading Hakluyt. We talked a little bit about his station, like what he did for a living, and he's an advisor to the Queen. He has some particularly interesting ideas, which we'll see. But also, we need to kind of take a broad view of what's going on in Europe at the time. And he writes this in 1584, and a lot's changed in Europe. The most important change in Europe is the Protestant Reformation. That starts in Germany, Hakluyt's in England, and if you remember your 10th grade world history, if you took it, the English had their own Reformation right around this time. That Reformation happened under King Henry VIII. Queen Elizabeth I was one of the daughters of Henry VIII, and she's queen now. So it hasn't been that long since the English broke away from the Roman Church, the Catholic Church, and formed the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. That's important because we're going to see religion play a pretty significant role in the source. Also, going on at the time is a rivalry with Spain. The Spanish in 1584 are perhaps the most powerful European kingdom, period. Portugal might give them a run for their money every once in a while, but Spain's the real deal. France isn't really doing much just yet. Germany is so torn apart by the Reformation, it can't have any sense of clear policy. Italy doesn't really care about the New World because they're doing fine in the Indian Ocean world. So we have Spain, and England is late to the game, and England and Spain don't like each other. They've never liked each other. England doesn't hate Spain as much as they hate France, but Spain's kind of crawling up there. So we're going to look for that rivalry throughout the source. And we're going to look for the usual stuff too. I would imagine that coming into a source like this, you probably have a pretty good idea of why people colonize. And the reason is usually economics, plain and simple. The place that we're colonizing has stuff that we want, and we want to get it. Whatever the means necessary to get it. And of course, you know, there's some other stuff that gets thrown in there too. But first and foremost, whenever you read documents like this, you're going to find somebody talking about money. Trade, but it's really about money, the grand scheme of things. So without any further ado, let's switch over to the source itself and take a look. And I need to look at a different camera now. That over. All right, so here is the source that you've been given. If you are in one of my classes or you are taking the competency-based version of History 1301, this is the source that you will have in your hand. If you're coming from another institution or you just found this because the YouTube algorithm is being kind to my sweet channel, you can find a version of Hakluyt at the American Yop, which is the textbook that we use. The difference between the two is this has a little bit more to it, and this has annotations that I've made to help us understand the source a little bit better. So if you're reading it on your own, you get a sense of what's going on without having to look things up, because it's just convenient that way. All right, so the first thing that we do when we look at a primary source, if you've never done this before, is we read the introduction. Don't jump right into the source. This is a mistake. The introduction can help us understand what we are about to read. And if we understand what we are about to read, we are going to take a lot more information away because we've already discovered what the main point of the thing we're reading is. So this is the introduction right here. If you're reading a primary source, it's usually in italic print. So here's the basics. Hakluyt writes this to convince Elizabeth I to really put the power of the English throne into colonization. He writes 21 chapters. They're summarized here, and he's emphasizing the benefits. Now, Hakluyt's Discourse of Western Planting is a really long work. If you went and got it from the library, it's a couple of volumes, each of which are somewhere around 350 pages. But I know you don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. So we're just going to look at the chapter titles, which gives us a good sense of what he's arguing. And it takes a lot less time. So my notes, which are the second paragraph here, is telling you that you are about to read a document that uses kind of some old-fashioned English, which, you know, that can be difficult. But the key here is that they might add an eth instead of just an e. They might just add an e on the end of something like good, G-O-O-D-E. Sometimes y is replaced with IE. Spain has an extra e on the end. And my advice here is that if you're having trouble decoding one of those words, or really any word, try to say it out loud. It's hard, and it might seem kind of embarrassing, but trust me, it works. All right, let's jump into this. Now, the first one that we're going to look at is that this Western discovery will be greatly for the enlargement of the gospel of Christ, whereunto the princes of the reformed religion are chiefly bound, amongst whom her majesty is principally. Oof. We need to decode this a little bit. The key is gospel of Christ, right? We all know what that is. Or if you don't, it's the Bible. Specifically, the New Testament. And what Hakluyt is saying is he wants to enlarge the gospel of Christ. He wants to spread it around. And he thinks that the English should be the one to do this because Queen Elizabeth I is the the first among all royalty in all of Europe. Shouldn't be Spain, France, Germany, Italy. Shouldn't be them, he's saying. It must be the Queen of England, Elizabeth I. Now, here's something that's somewhat different. Number 2, that all other English trades are grown beggarly or dangerous. English trades means like jobs, especially in shipping merchandise back and forth across the Atlantic, to the Caribbean, maybe to North America eventually, not yet. They're also doing a lot of trade within Europe and elsewhere. And those jobs have become, they've kind of dried up. That's what beggarly is trying to say here. It's like they don't pay very well, or they're really dangerous. And it's especially true wherever the King of Spain is. And what's really dangerous for these folks is our men are driven to fling their Bibles and prayer books into the sea, and to forswear and renounce their religion and conscience, and consequently their obedience to Her Majesty. So what Hakluyt's saying here is that when the English go into places controlled by the King of Spain, who practices a different form of Christianity than the British do, is making the British throw their Bibles away and to say, I belong to the one true church headed by the Pope, renouncing the Reformation that has just gone on. And this isn't good, because one of the key tenets of the Protestant Reformation, whether it was in Germany, Switzerland, England, or wherever, is that the Roman Church had fallen and was not any longer the correct way of practicing Christianity in a European context, at least. Okay, so this is bad for the soul. We have two themes that have emerged immediately. We have religion, and we have trade. Remember what I said at the top, that we're going to see religion and trade? No surprise. And the next couple do the same sort of thing. 3 and 4 are also about trade. I'm not going to read these in full because I don't want this video to be an hour long. But what they say essentially is, if we colonize in North America, we are going to be able to supply all of our trade that has dried up. If we go colonize over there, we're going to have all of the goods of Europe, Africa, and Asia. And we won't even have to travel anywhere else. If we colonize North America, we'll get everything. And also, with number 4, because our economy is so bad, nobody has jobs. And there's just idle men, guys who are unemployed, just sitting around. And when people are unemployed, they're broke, they go into poverty, and when they have nothing to do, they get rowdy. Poverty and crime are linked. I see you, criminal justice majors. So this means Hakluyt is thinking, if we get them jobs over in the New World, in North America, well, we're going to solve that problem. Kind of. I mean, that's what he's saying. The result maybe isn't what he imagined. The next two have to do with Spain, specifically. Number one, he wants England to be a bridle, which is a thing that kind of restrains the horse by the snout so that you can steer the horse where you want to go. So he's trying to keep the King of Spain back, and he's saying, oh, they fish, the Spanish do, in Newfoundland, which, if you don't know, is Canada. It's northeastern Canada. You can look it up on Google Maps. And what Hakluyt is going to suggest here is, hey, if they're there, and there's a few hundred of them, we could send our navy in, and we could arrest them, and then we'll have hostages. And the Spanish king will have to negotiate for them. And in the next one, he says, oh, by the way, the Spaniards are worse than the Turks. And if you're wondering, why would he be talking about Turkish people? That seems weird. We were talking about Spain. He's English. What does Turkey have to do with this? Well, here's the thing, folks. This is where historical context can help you out. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks conquered the city of Constantinople in Greece. Constantinople was seen as one of the most important cities in all of Christendom. It belonged to the East instead of the West most of the time, but this was the ultimate embarrassment for Western Christianity, for Europe, for Greece. And whenever somebody makes an enemy, right, we like to make them seem as bad as possible. And so over the 100 years and more between the conquering of Constantinople in 1453 and when Hakluyt writes this in 1584, there's been a lot of time to really make the Turks into boogeymen. And they're a useful tool if we want to talk some shiz about somebody else, right? Well, he's saying, Hakluyt is, that the Spanish are actually worse than the Turks. So the worst people that we've ever had in history, Spain's actually worse than they are. And they are so cruel to the Spanish they are so cruel to the native people who are living in Spanish occupied territory in North and South America that those native people are willing to revolt against them. Which, true. But also, it's not like the English want to, they really care about the natives. The English would be doing the same thing. This feeds into something that's called the Black Legend. And the Black Legend was a narrative that the Spanish, in their colonization, were uniquely cruel people to the natives. And the English ate this up. They loved this. It just validated everything that they thought about how Spain worked and how terrible they were. It's an over-exaggeration. I want to make that 100% clear. Were the Spanish cruel? Yes. Were they uniquely cruel compared to England and France and Germany and everyone else who eventually ended up in North America doing some colonization? No, they weren't. They were cruel, but they weren't uniquely cruel. Everybody is doing about the same number of cruelty things, is what I'm trying to say. In any event, let's go on to the next few. we are going to go back to trade again. So 7 has to do with trade, and it helps if my pen is turned on. He's saying, look, you know, if we colonize in North America, we're going to be able to charge more tolls, excises, which is taxes, and other duties, more taxes, and it won't be a problem for us. So our revenues are going to increase. And if our revenues increase, then we can get more stuff. And if we can get more stuff, we can sell more stuff, which is going to make our revenue go up even more. So we go there, we do the trading, we tax what we're trading so we can invest more so that we can do more trading. We do more trading, tax that more trading, and the cycle continues. Trade, tax, invest, trade, tax, invest. Hope that makes sense. Connected to this, I think, is number 8, where he's saying, hey, this is going to make it easier for us to grow our Navy, maintain our Navy, and keep them safe. One of the things that, especially in the United States, the government loves to spend money on is national defense, right? We tax our people, and that tax money goes into letting the government do what the government needs to do, rightly or wrongly. But one of the things that most politicians agree on is funding defense. That funding of defense comes from taxes. Hakluyt's essentially saying they're going to do the same thing. The next one, that speedy planting in diverse fit places is most necessary upon these lucky Western discoveries for fear of the danger of being prevented by other nations, which have the like intentions with the order thereof and other reasons therewithal alleged. Good Lord, bro. Like, all you got to do is say it plainly. What he's saying here, let me translate 16th century English for you, because that looks weird, right? What he's saying is like, look, we need to get there first, because if we don't, all of our rivals, Spain, France, Germany, maybe Italy, if Italy decides that they want to come over to North America, they're going to take the land because they're going to do the same thing that we're going to do. So we better beat them to it. And we know that they want to do what we want to do because of all of the evidence I've talked about before. That's the reasons therewithal alleged. He's saying, look, I've already told you why these guys are going to do this. So why aren't we getting to it immediately? The last two, I'm going to be honest, when I edited the source, I left these two in because they're my two favorite. They don't really help us understand Hakluyt all that much, because really this is about religion and trade, like we said at the top. But 10 and 11 fit in too. So let's say that 10 is related to trade. And what he says is that by these colonies, the Northwest Passage to Cathay and China may easily, quickly, and perfectly be searched out, as well by river and overland, blah, 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 geography tells us. Here's the deal. You have to think like a 16th century guy. And their sense of geography isn't like ours. They don't have Google Maps. And especially for a lot of Europeans in 1584, they had never seen North America. And they had a good handle on what the coasts looked like, but they didn't know anything about the interior. Remember, when Columbus sailed west, he sailed thinking that he was going to land in China because that's where he wanted to go. And when he hit an island, which was the Bahamas, he was like, oh, I must be in India. Because at the time, Europeans thought that India was a series of islands, not a subcontinent attached to the Asian continent. So when Europe figured out that there were these two giant continents, North and South America, they thought that there was a river that started at the Atlantic Ocean and went to the west out to the Pacific Ocean, a river that covers the entire North American continent. You and I know that that river doesn't exist. And if you didn't know, now you do. But they thought it did. And they thought that they could take their boats on this river, pop out into the Pacific Ocean, and then it would just be a short sail longer to get to China and India, which is where they want to do trade. Cathay is Southeast Asia. Okay, so like the Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, etc. China's China. So he thinks that if we, and by we I mean the English, colonize North America, we're going to find this river, we're going to find our way to Southeast Asia and China, and then we will have control over the trade that goes between the Americas and the East, meaning China. Dreams dashed, bro. The British will eventually get to India, and they will colonize India too. You can take world history if you want to know that story. But not yet. In any event, the last one, number 11, he's saying an answer to the bull of the donation of all the West Indies granted to the kings of Spain by Pope Alexander VI, who was himself a Spaniard born. When the Spanish and the Portuguese got to the Americas, they're rivals, okay? Spain and Portugal are. And they both appealed to the Pope, who at the time was Alexander VI. This is Rodrigo Borgia. That was his given name. And if you've seen the series The Borgias or read about the Borgias, that's this guy. Alexander VI heard their petitions, he received them, and he said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to draw a line. And he drew a line that divided the Americas essentially in half. It's more like 2/3 and 1/3 favoring the Spanish, because as Hakluyt points out, Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, was born in Spain. How does that connect to the modern world, you might wonder? Well, if you know the geography of language, you know that Brazilians, the people, not the waxing job, Brazilians speak Portuguese. Whereas the language of colonization in Mexico and most of South America, except for Brazil, is Spanish. That goes back all the way to that line. Right there. And what he's saying, Hakluyt, or Hakluyt, as I guess it's pronounced, is that, you know what? The Pope did this. The Pope sucks. We don't like him. He's illegitimate and can go fly a kite somewhere. We need to answer this and say, no, bro. Take off your Pope hat for 2 seconds because the English are here. And we want to slap you in the face. Essentially. All right. So that's our walkthrough. really what you need to take away from this primary source is that the English motivation for colonization, at least in 1584, seems to be about two things: religion and trade. And guess what, folks? As you move forward in American history, we're going to talk about two kinds of colonies. We're going to talk about colonies that are more focused on trade and colonies that are more focused on religion. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.